Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. You're listening to a new episode of Secure Your Strategy Podcast, where your host, Chloé Messdaghi, provides strategies to leaders and managers on how to repair critical issues in security and tech. We're glad you've tuned in. It's time to secure your strategy and your stakeholder approval. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Secure Your Strategy. And with me today, I have Jane Frankland. And Jane, go ahead and say hello.
Hi. I was going to go hi.
Hey, it's okay if we wave to each other. People will see the video version if they want to watch it. But other than that, for those that aren't, seeing the video, we are waving to each other. But Jane, thank you for joining with me today. And for those that are not aware, she also wrote this book called Insecurity. And I remember back in 2018, it was in my first year joining cybersecurity. And I was just going through a rough patch of where is diversity here in this industry. And I wanted to understand, why was I feeling so, I have no words to describe it. You just felt like every single waking moment, you wish that you were silent and quiet in the room, because otherwise you will face shame. And I felt very much alone and isolated. This was before I started networking and learning about all these several great nonprofits that help women in this industry. And I remember going on Amazon looking for anything that I could read about, so I would know what is going on, and if it's just in my head, or is this actually happening in real life to other women too. And I remember there was only one book about it, which was this book right here, if you can see in the video, but if not, I will describe it to the podcast listeners. It is a gray silverish book that says Insecurity: Why a Failure to Attract and Retain Women in Cybersecurity is Making Us All Less Safe. And I remember coming across this and reading it, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone in the industry. This was the changing moment, was this book for me. And I remember that when I met with Jane, I was so thankful that she wrote this book. And I cannot imagine how difficult it must have been to write about this book, around the Me Too era. But I'm pretty sure you already were starting this before then.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. That book happened as an accident. And what was really interesting was, after I wrote it, because really it was a research project. I didn't realize that. I was just doing something that I stumbled across and really thought, well, I want to share my view initially, on a blog, and then it became a book. But I really wanted to help the industry, and I wanted to help women especially. But I didn't realize how alone women felt until after the book was published, and women came to me and said, just as you did, I don't feel alone anymore. And that was it was really quite shocking to me, just how alone women felt. So I really enjoyed researching that book, and it really was a research project, so I had to read, there are 200 data points in that book, and some of those data points might be 90-page, research papers. So I was not only creating new data, but also going out and looking, well, what does exist right now? What is the situation? Talking to women, talking to men, and, lots and lots of people to hear their view and get their experience, as well as tell stories, my experience and what I'd gone through, mostly as an entrepreneur. And then to delve into some of the research and join just a few things up.
And, since the release of the book and then the Me Too movement happened, I felt like this book was that perfect timing when it came out, because, even though the Me Too movement was in 2017 and started, it was like a good number of years where suddenly women groups were getting funded, where we're starting to see more women have higher positions of, authority and, really being in the spotlight actually at conferences too. We were starting to see women, not the moderator for panels, but actually being the speaker, the keynote speaker. And then now we go through a pandemic, and then through the pandemic, it seemed like a lot of women in our space just felt suddenly isolated, alone again, where they felt like they were taking on too much and the burnout rate was so much higher. And then them feeling trapped again.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think it's really, really bad. We kind of got through the pandemic, and there's just so much burnout. And women. I mean, I can't call on any data in cyber to do with women and burnout because it's just not been done. But certainly talking to loads of women, and myself included, it's so much more for women because they just invariably are asked to take on more +1 roles, more jobs. So will you just do this? Will you just come on, a podcast, a video, a masterclass? I do it. Look, I'm on yours now. You've asked yes to it. There are so many asks. And I was having a conversation with someone today about this. And it's great that we are being asked and people are asking, including women who are asking, can you do this for me? But equally, we need to get better at saying no, because so much is just being put upon us. And it's hard to know sometimes, like, well, what do I say yes to? What do I say no to? And it's very, very easy to get caught out and end up not realizing just how close you are to burnout, or that you're actually, you've become ill because of the situation. So, I know for me last year, I didn't realize, how close I came until I was actually giving a masterclass on it. And I was quite embarrassed because it's just like, oh my God, I'm recognizing some symptoms here. But that was good because it meant that I could actually, pull back a bit and say no more, and actually be far more aware of it, so I could protect, my health and other things I was doing, outside of this industry.
Yeah, that undertone of society pushing, young girls and even women to be people pleasers too, right? It's always like you don't want to say no for many reasons. One of them is because of people pleasing. It's been, really ingrained in us to people please. And then also because the caretaker kind of, society pushes well on the norms. But then you also have this thing where if I say no to something, I'm going to be on someone's cutting board. If I say no to someone, they're going to call me the B word. If I put down boundaries to protect my safety and also, making sure that I'm being paid for the work I'm supposed to do, I'm going to get laid off.
That's one way to look at it. And I think most people, we're talking about women here, do, so it's really playing into that scarcity mindset. It's just like, if I don't, then, it's gonna pass me by, or I'm going to be laid off, or whatever. But it really, I think we need to shift that thinking and work on the basis that nothing passes you by. What's meant for you will not pass you by, so hold firm, don't take on too much. This whole kind of quiet quitting business, I think it's a good thing. Push back. If you don't feel that you can do it because it's going to affect your health or your relationships outside of work, because we don't live to work, it's part of our full lives that we're having, then you need to do that. So work on that basis, so it is a kind of shift in that mindset and not playing into the fear mongering and the scarcity. And when we're thinking about that, tech layoffs, just before this call, I actually did a quick look at how many tech layoffs have happened. We're on day 11 in January. 20,000 tech layoffs already. So last year we had an awful lot of that. So it's interesting how this is all kind of playing out, because you've got a real situation there, and then you've got the mind kind of playing out. So I think it really is a case of holding firm, doing what you need to, believing in yourself, believing in abundance, that there is enough for you. If they cut you, if they lay you off, something better is on its way for you. Our industry is actually buoyant. Although there are these layoffs, it's growing, it's developing, and it is actually pretty buoyant. So there is enough for you, and you're going to be okay. So almost like course correct, don't play into that way of thinking.
Yeah. And what are some, I guess, red flags that people can see when they're interviewing, whether or not this is going to be a healthy workplace that, really does, make it a priority to constantly keep improving on DEI, versus a company that, I would say like DEI washing, kind of like greenwashing, but DEI washing. What are some signs that people can know ahead of time when they're trying to decide whether or not to interview with a company, or even just whether or not to even accept a job offer?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I would look at places like Glassdoor. I would try connecting with people and asking them, what it's really like, because a company can give a great image, the perception, that they're on it and it's a fantastic place to work, just from their websites and their marketing information and things like that. So I would ask around and look on Glassdoor, and yeah, maybe even speak to some of the people at that organization if you can. I mean, sometimes that's available for you. Usually it is if you are more of a leader or moving into an executive position, then that is usually there. But aside from that, it's really hard to know, what it's like. But one bit of advice I would give is, when you do start a job, you might not want to put, if you're able, your position on LinkedIn, because if you do get in there and find out that it's not the right place for you, that it's absolute BS as to what they've told you, it's absolutely dire, then no one needs to know about that kind of, your next job role at that company. So kind of like limiting the damage, the risk.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially like, I feel like the first 3 months, the 90 days, companies usually put you in that situation of testing you out. You should be testing them out too in those 90 days. You don't need to put it on your resume. You don't need to put it anywhere, if you can. And then, I feel like usually how bad the place will be by the 6-month mark. I feel like that's that turning moment where you are starting to be like, why am I feeling overwhelmed here? Why do I feel like I'm too much in my head suddenly when I'm working here? I feel like that's like that. Yeah, that golden arch.
It's 3 to 6 months. Yeah, you've got a good idea, and vice versa as well. But I would definitely agree with you on that. I'm interested. Can you think of any other pointers, from your experience, that would be useful?
Yeah. I know in interviewing, a good question to always ask is like, not only do you ask who would be your future manager, like what's your style like when managing and leading people, and what are some of the things that you're constantly working on to improve of yourself by being a leader, but also to ask those that would be working on your team, that you'd be working closely with, asking them like, what is the leadership style on the team? And try to get a feel of that and ask questions, diving a little bit more like, oh, do you have any examples of times where, you thought that you felt disempowered or empowered in your job? I think asking that is really important. And I know sometimes people are a little bit nervous to interview the interviewer back, but the reality is it is a two-way street. You're also making a decision that's going to be impacting your career, but also your personal life too. So Absolutely. You deserve to do that.
I completely agree with that. I mean, it's just like, and I've done that before. It's just like, I'm checking you out just as much as you're checking me out. It's a two-way process. I'm making a decision, on whether I want to come and invest my time, with you. So I've asked about leadership styles. What does a good 90 days, look like? How are you evaluating me? What are your weaknesses? So I've done quite a lot of the interviewing of checking them out before I make that next step. And of course, the other thing that you can do as well is you can ask about attrition rate. If they know it, if they'll give you, an honest answer. How many women are leaving your company? How many women are joining? What are the figures? Because those figures can be massaged to tell a great story. What are the percentages of tech women joining? If you're a technical woman joining the organization, what are they, as opposed to all kind of like levels and roles being added up together, which is usually what's done. It's like marketing, sales, operations, HR, anyone. You're just there like increasing the numbers, making it look sometimes much better than it is. So I would always ask about the technical numbers and the attrition as well.
Yeah, absolutely on that. I remember one time I did ask that question in an interview when someone kind of was just like, why are you asking me about these statistics? And I'm like, well, I just want to make sure it's a welcoming environment and that there's opportunities of growth there. I mean, it may not be perfect now, and that's okay, but at least constantly keep wanting to work on it. That's what I would love to see. And I just remember like afterwards beating myself up about like, oh, I should have not asked that question. I'm not going to get this role now. But then at the end of the day, it worked out in so many ways, because if they have a problem with you asking such questions, that means it's not going to be a good place. That means they got defensive when they should have been there to support, to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another great point, because you can also ask, well, what support is there, for me when I join? What's the onboarding process like? Is there a women's group that I can be involved in, and so on. So yeah, great points, Chloe.
No, great points, Jane. I mean, like, you literally wrote the book on this. But you also have been going into a new passion, which I remember when we chatted back in December, I was so enthusiastic to see that there's another person finally talking about sustainability, because it's such a taboo for so many years to talk about in our industry, because like climate change. No, that's too left. Why are you bringing up leftist, stuff?
Really?
And I'm just like, how is this leftist? It's facts. These are all facts. This is reality. This is happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, the situation is horrific. It's it's absolutely awful. I mean, I've done a few talks on this. I did an influencer piece with Intel recently, bringing up sustainability, and it's really not good. And we need to be taking far more action than we are. This is like the number one global risk right now, and quite rightly so when you look at what is happening. I mean, we've used a third of the world's resources in the past, 30 years, depleted them. We've got something like 27 years left before, according to some researchers, before we run out of food, 25 years left before we run out of fish. 1.8 billion people are going to be without drinking water by 2025, and 50% of the world's population are going to be in stressed drinking areas. We are already overusing our planet's resources, because of our consumption, because of our waste output. And that's to the extent that we need 1.7 planets to sustain us, right now. So, with all of these things, the weather, it's that's the tip of the iceberg. We have to be doing something about it. And when you listen to the likes of Greta Thunberg, speak about it, it's heartbreaking. She's older now, but her journey started as a kid, and like, wow, what an amazing person she is, and how brave and courageous, the trolling that she's had to undergo, and the power that she has, particularly as a child, with all of that activism and bringing the world together to become more active about this and to do more. It's really quite incredible, but we have to do better, and we can do better, but we need more of a focus on this. It should, and I know it is written into a lot of policies, but we need to be doing so much better on this, for the sake of our planet.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where even talking to CEOs of companies and boards in cybersecurity, so like cybersecurity companies, I would say, it doesn't even seem like it's on their radar. It's one of those things where it's incredibly controversial, and you just look at what's going on. You see the stats, even you just shared some stats, and it doesn't like go over their head. It's just, they're just like, okay.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with me and tomorrow my business?
But this is it. It's like it's not real. It's like, what bit of this don't you get? Every single person has a part to play, particularly at a leadership level, inside of work and outside of it. How are you living? What's your contribution? It's literally, it has to be a number one importance. But I think the problem is, much like gender and the whole women inside, is they are so focused on the job at hand, and they are under-resourced and extremely pressurized, and they are just caught in the depths of it. It's just like, okay, what next? How do I sort this out? We've got, cyber attacks coming, data breaches, etc., etc., etc. It's almost beyond them, So it's, but the thing is, it can be and must be interwoven into every single thing that they are doing. And the more aware of this, then the better we are going to be doing, because we are going to be using greener technologies. We are going to be using better approaches. We are going to be getting more of a diverse workforce in place, because they make better decisions and are less wasteful, and we're obviously like reducing attacks when that happens. So all of these things combined, shift left approaches, when we're building technologies and things like that, they all have to be considered and must be.
Do you think that the reasons that there's such pushback is because I feel like cybersecurity, the industry as a whole, it's much more reactive because we don't have time to do preventative. And basically, if we were to change the conversation instead of being reactive, what to do when you have the situation, and make it more about how do we plan for these situations, do you think it would be easier of a conversation? Because even today, like I think the statistic is 73% of companies that may not have an incident response plan. They would go ad hoc. So that's already letting you know we're not even prepared for anything. When the pandemic hit, we weren't prepared for that at all as an industry. And still, we're going to see more of that with climate change. More pandemics will occur. So how do we get that conversation shifting from being so reactive and start changing it to become more preventative?
It's such a good question. I'm not really sure without help from governments, without awareness. And also, I think companies need to have, and some do, those targets. It has to come from the top. The fish rots from the head down. So it's got to come from the top. And the CEOs, the board, they've got to be making sure that the right questions are being asked, in terms of all of these things. We've just spoken about incident response plans. And to me, that's pretty basic, and it's horrifying to think that the numbers are so high. But we've got to be doing it. It's got to come from the top, and we need support from the government. That's my view.
Yeah. The other thing came through my mind is, so there's like ESG reporting, sustainability reporting. For those who aren't aware, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And basically, if you were in finance, you put out these sustainability reports, especially if you're in the EU. It is part of the law now to put them out there. But also we're seeing this shift also happening in other industries, including tech. So you'll see, like, for example, Meta will put out a sustainability report. You'll see like Dropbox put out a sustainability report. And in those reports, it gives you all the demographics about, you know, when it comes to representation, to what are they doing about climate change and getting ready for that. Do you think that somehow we can try to build out the conversation for cybersecurity companies to start using ESG or sustainability reporting? Maybe that would be that pressure. Maybe, like you said, government, it could be a government federal like response to that. You have to put out these sustainability reports for people to have aware of what's going on.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to do, unless there's a driver, I don't think they're going to do any more than they have to. I mean, that's usually the case in business. You know, you'll get some great companies that will do that, but most of them won't, you know, because it eats up more resource, you know, for them to do that, because they've got to employ more people and they've got to change their ways, and they will probably have more of a short-term attitude to it, as opposed to a long-term responsible global contribution to the problem. Yeah. And, you know, if we think about cybersecurity as well, the other thing that I think really needs to be mentioned is just the tenure of security leaders, you know, which is low. So, you know, in terms of making these changes and things like that, you know, if we know that on average a security leader is staying in their jobs for 2 years, you know, 22 months, I think, or less than 2 years, then how can they actually make real change within that? It's just churning the whole time. Someone new comes in, they get in, have a look at the situation, put a plan together, and then like how they're off. And again, it's just like repeat. Someone else will come in and they'll put their view and then they'll go. So we're not making as much progress as we need to, because of that environment. And when you compare it to like a CEO's average tenure is 4 to 5 years, you know, so that's twice the tenure of a security leader. So it's like, what's going on? You know, why is that? How can we make better progress? You know, not just in terms of our sustainability, but in terms of our data breaches and attacks.
Do you think a lot of it's like around scapegoating, for example, like using someone, saying it's their fault that this happened? Because we see that happening all the time for CISOs. It's like, even the CISOs like, hey, we need the following things, or hey, I need more funding on this, and they get denied. But then if something were to happen, even though they've told and shared the risks, they're like, no, we're not giving it to you. But now, because you're going through it, you're going to be on the chopping block. You're going to get removed, and the blame is going to go on you that you weren't a leader enough for this. You weren't good enough for this. When in reality, it seems like a scapegoat situation, because the people that should be responsible are the ones that were ignoring the risks in the first place.
So I do think that has a lot to do with that. I really do.
Yeah. What is the one thing that you hope that this year in 2023, because we just started 2023, that you want to see in conversations more than ever before this year?
Ooh. Well, in conversations, it's more, I want to see more action being taken. You know, so I'm a little bit tired of conversations, you know, particularly on the gender aspect. It's like, I'm done with that. We spent like 7 years, a decade longer talking about this, and we are making progress, but it's so slow. And in my opinion, it's too slow. So all we seem to be doing is talking about it. You know, do we need to take more action, and real action, not just action that will satisfy effectively compliance, a report, you know, an ESG report, or a gender diversity report for a website, or some other kind of asset. So I want to see action being taken, rather than more talk, more conversations. You know, as far as I'm concerned, it's time to do. Let's get on with it. You know, we've been talking about this for too long. Let's just get on and do it.
Yeah, it seemed like the gender thing was really taken up in 2018, where people were like, oh, we have to do better on this, and taking actions and initiatives. But now it's weird. It's kind of like switching around with Roe versus Wade being overturned in the US, the Amber Heard case. It seems like women now in our industry are becoming a little bit nervous in a sense that we're going back to how things were before the Me Too movement.
Yeah, it's interesting. I also think that that's happening because people are getting fed up of it. Oh, here's another woman banging on about it. So that whole complainer effect, so I think that's one of the reasons why. And, we've always had, this, we want to be doing the work that we do because we're the best person for the job, not because of our gender, or we're meeting, a target, gender diversity target. So I think, we're becoming a little bit tired of it as well, and some of us are becoming even more cynical. Again, it's not really being talked about out there because there's a lot of fear. Well, I can't say that because I'm going to be reprimanded in my job, or it's going to affect my job, or, might affect me getting clients or whatever. So there is a tiredness of it. Not again. It's boring. We've done that, and I think obviously like the repercussions and things like that. So I think it's time for a different, if we're having a conversation, it would be time for a different conversation. And the different conversation is probably about inclusion and being you in the workplace. That's what, my company says. It's about being you in the workplace and being more of your authentic self and being true to what you are and not tolerating and going out and, do it, getting on with that, excelling, thriving.
Not being seen as being difficult, right? It's always like, anytime you speak up, she's difficult. Anytime, like throughout history, women have always been labeled difficult when they're asking for just the right to vote, the right to like have bathroom breaks and jobs. Yeah. Like if you look through it, it's always been, she's difficult. And I think we're still dealing with that to this day.
We really are. Yeah. Difficult, abrasive, too demanding, too much hard work, too challenging. Again, it's like too much. We're either too much or we're not enough. Yeah. Not technical enough or too technical. It's not good enough. So yeah, all of those things surround us.
The seesaw effect. You're always trying to figure out, am I on too much on this side or am I too much on that side? And then you get to a point in your life where you're like, I don't want to do this game anymore. I'm just going to be myself.
Yeah, this is it. You just kind of go, I was going to say something rude there. It's just something very British, it's just like, and you just go like, and get on with it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, Jane, thank you so much for being on here today. It was lovely to have you. I look forward to having you back on in the future. And hopefully it'll be us revisiting this one and then talking about how people finally took action.
Exactly. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jane.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Secure Your Strategy podcast with Chloé Messdaghi, part of the ITSP Magazine podcast network. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then share this channel and ITSPmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey.